And I think Tom and I enjoyed putting the book together, and we hope you enjoy reading it. And it's a great privilege for me to introduce our speaker, Gearoid. I was at Gearoid's retirement in 2015. Now, I know Gearoid is far too early to retire, but that's what they do in the academic world, they retire you early. But at that wonderful occasion, Michael D. Higgins was there. And Michael D. said that Gearoid was one of the greatest historians of his generation. And those that know Gearoid and knows his works, I'm sure would agree wholeheartedly. But that launch, retirement reception, saw the launch of a book, Culture and Society in Ireland since 1750, Essays in Honour of Gearoid. The new book brought together 23 essays by academic colleagues and former students, and they reflected Gearoid's versatility. The subject matter of the essays ranged from famine of 1741 to the plays of Martin MacDonagh, from Irish soldiers to Irish traditional musicians, from prisons to dispensaries, the whole wide range. And I want to say that this morning in Charlie Burns there was a discussion about Gearoid's teaching. And it was quite a good discussion. 2 or 3 people lent their voices to it. And they talked about the history department at NUIG in the 80s and 90s, where they said it was just alive with animation, with historians and wonderful historians. Garrett McNichol, as really people who projected their enthusiasm for their subject. And I say that because I came from a background where history was badly taught at school. And I was very sorry I did not have that NUIG experience. But I had one, Gearoid, and you might be remembering this. I think you had an outreach program in the 1980s. I remember standing in Tiffy Winkle's pub in Kinvara.
Tom O'Neill.
Yes, Tom O'Neill was there. And the pub was jammed. I mean, it was a brilliant classroom, actually. The pub was jammed. Everybody smoking, as they did then, drink in their hand, and Tom O'Neill was talking. And I can't remember all that he said. He was talking about Parnell. But he gave me one great anecdote. He said, people always knew when Parnell travelled by train crisscrossing the country, and they would come down to the tracks hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But Parnell's carriage was always the most brightly lit. The gas was turned up full. The carriage was jammed with journalists and followers, all smoking, Parnell smoking a cigar. And as the train passed, the people would shout out, Parnell, Parnell. I just thought that was a wonderful image. Because I have learned from that and learned from my own writing, to some extent, what I try to do is to tell a story. I think if you can tell the story, history suddenly becomes totally alive. And unfortunately, I was taught by people that just told us facts and figures. But that doesn't matter, that's a long time ago. I've learned a lot since then. And I've learned a lot from Gearoid. And just to complete my introduction, Gearoid is Professor Emeritus, of course, in history, former Dean of Arts and Vice President of NUI Galway. He was appointed to the Council of State by President Michael D. Higgins. So ladies and gentlemen, please, a welcome for Gearoid.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, for those kind words and over-generous words of introduction. And it puts me on boating this muinte, as we would say, when you mentioned Tom O'Neill and how much Tom did to bridge over between academic history. It is more commonly used, I think, in suggesting a more pervasive sense of life and vitality in pubs, cafes, and other intimate spaces of talk and laughter and music. And it includes, usually, Galway's street symphony of greetings, of music, and of accents. Accents now in many languages, including our own too. A more ambitious undertaking than simply referring to the buzz casually of Galway may be the various efforts that have been made to capture, as it were, in some form or other, the personality of Galway, its special character, as it were. The notion of a personality of place, of course, owes much to the Welsh social geographer Estyn Evans, who spoke about the personality of a place residing in three particular things, easily remembered because they are alliterative. That is to say, habitat, history, and heritage. And that it is these three that, if you like, confer, it is from these three that one can distill the personality of a place. This notion, of course, of a place having a personality is a conceit. It's a linguistic and literary conceit. But it's very common among writers. We're all, of course, familiar with the ways in which personifications of place have been done in the past. Most notably, for example, and almost a cliche, Ireland being represented as a female person, as Kathleen Ní Húlaháin, Fola, Róisín Dubh. And finding metaphors to give a place character has been a stock trope of many writers the world over. And of course, Galway has proved irresistibly attractive to this kind of personification. The deployment of metaphors to conjure up, as it were, the special personality and character of Galway. Here's one that you may be familiar with, and then again may not. It's from Sean O'Fuailline, writing in 1940. And this is what he had to say. Not the most flattering, but I'll give it to you anyway. Galway is unpretendingly what it is. A rank country town spreading out and out, hither and thither like a spilt drink. Galway has gone back to the bog. It is like that hinterland that feeds it. It is dark and weathered and dusky. It is hell-raked by the wind at every corner and comforted by pubs. It is sour, sweet, and smelly as an empty barrel. It is a ship's bell on a wintry night, sonorous, vacant, and moody. It is a Connemara pony out on grass, indifferent, wild-spirited, uncontrollable, shaggy. All the most interesting life is lived underground in Galway. Like, and then he switches the metaphor to cheese, like Gruyere, it is burrowed, even as it smells like gorgonzola. Now, O'Fuailline's broad and extravagant brushstrokes, with apologies to Pádraig Ó Rith, his broad and extravagant brushstrokes are undoubtedly striking and vivid. But a deeper and more firmly anchored sense of Galway, perhaps, is better achieved through the sharing, through the community, of a rich web of associations, through memory, family legend and folklore, and crucially, through narratives of Galway's history and striking images of its past. This web of associations is obviously vital to a strong sense of community solidarity and cohesion, both for particular communities and neighbourhoods, as we all know very well, a Claddagh version of itself, Bohermore, Shantil, or whatever, but also for the people of Galway as a single collectivity. And this is so whether one is Galway born and bred, or a more recent settler, or as it is often said, a blow-in. And I'm beginning to think, Tom, a blow-in is anybody who arrived later than the 17th century at this stage. But having said that, whether one or t'other, as it were, that web of associations is invaluable. And this brings me logically, if somewhat circuitously, to two of that heroic band dedicated to generating and sharing this rich mosaic of words and images of Galway's past. Tom Kenny and Ronnie O'Gorman. For several decades in their columns in the Galway Advertiser, and indeed more recently through the podcast, they have produced a fabulous trove of stories and photos relating to Galway and its people. I've suggested elsewhere that this is in effect an important source of social capital, and its value is simply incalculable. And never more necessary than in recent years, as Galway's population grows, becomes more widely dispersed geographically, and ever more diverse culturally and in ethnic origin. And indeed, as the physical appearance of much of the city and its outer reaches alters and is transformed indeed in front of our very eyes. What a priceless gift it is, not only for newcomers, to have these vignettes, images and stories of Galway life, week in, week out, in informative and accessible prose and image, and indeed in striking illustrations. It's worth emphasizing just how impressive an achievement it is to be able to encapsulate often complex stories, as Ronnie has rightly emphasized, stories in a lucidly readable column, as he does regularly, or to clearly identify buildings, street scenes, and people from old photographs, as Tom does regularly. It's deceptively simple to see these as newspaper columns, but when you see the rich texture of association and memory that they provide week in, week out, it is a really remarkable achievement. It's no surprise that there is feedback, as they say, to these columns. In particular, if we can claim, as I am sure we can claim, that these columns provide cultural seed capital, as it were, for newcomers to Galway, to enable them to get their bearings and to become embedded in the community more easily, more comfortably, more richly, then it is not in the least surprising that the columns also constitute a rich seam of memory and indeed of nostalgia for exiles, for those of the Galway diaspora. And never, never more welcome than this year. In these extraordinarily difficult times, remembrances of home for those who cannot get home or whose contacts with home have become very strained because of the exceptional circumstances of the last nearly 2 years now, how invaluable it is for them to be able to tap into a seam of remembrance, of recognition. One doesn't want to exaggerate the Proustian moment, as it were, of times past, but nonetheless, it is an important prompt, not just to memory, but to reflection about youth and self and community, and how rich it is to have this provided at such a time, such a difficult time, and at the same time, such an important time as Christmas. It is therefore wonderful to have a generous selection of these words and images now gathered together between two covers in a handsome book. The book, and indeed the idea, is a credit to those involved. It is an ideal Christmas gift, and I make no apologies for having that cliche coming at the end, as it were. It is an ideal Christmas gift, and I would certainly think that many, many people will have it, as it were, to look over and to test at home. In the same way as when people gather after events, family events, they like to trace people, trace connections. To see a photograph and say, do you remember who worked in that shop? Where was that now? At what corner? And wasn't he went to, and so on. And all of a sudden, an entire, as it were, symphony of associations and memories and narratives and stories begin to fill the room and begin to fill the memory as well. It is, as Ronnie said, for a very worthy cause. And if there were no other reason for buying it, and there are many, the cause is itself a worthy one for this time of year. So all that remains for me to do is to thank the both of them on all of our behalves and on behalf of all those out there. And I say out there meaning among the diaspora as well as among Galwegians, new and ancient. And to say that I didn't pointedly look at Tom when I was saying that. It was more an acknowledgement of pedigree than anything to do with the birth certificate. But I leave that be for the moment. To say a sincere thank you to both of them and to wish the book all the success that it deserves. Deartar gur be an cuimhne an rud is lochmhire ag a duine. Sa bhéad is go dúinn sé táin nó taisce dochreite tagartha do dhuine agus gur buite go mór muid dá éimeis. I will not say that anybody who gets this book will be without nourishment for their memory and for their sense of belonging. Sense of belonging not just to the now and to the community around them, but belonging to a place of associations. And isn't that a wonderfully enriching thing to give people for Christmas? Mashiv and vertigiv, and long life to the both of you.